Hello, everyone. My name is Hoda Fakour. I'm currently a faculty member and assistant professor in International College of Practice and Education for the Environment, International Program for Sustainable Development at Chang Christian University of Taiwan. It's my great pleasure to share with you the research achievements of our team on coastal cities' resilience and coping mechanisms in a changing climate. To proceed, I will first start with the short introductions. I will try to make it as short as possible, as I guess that you're all expert in this. Then I'll share with you the methods and case study in our research. And finally, I concluded with overall remarks and recommendations. Just take a short look at this picture. We've all heard about vulnerability more than ever recently. These are just some of the examples of headlines that we've been hearing every day. Possible virus vulnerability discovered. Vulnerable countries lack the capacity to respond to a global pandemic. Could certain COVID 19 vaccines leave people more vulnerable to the AIDS virus, and many, many more? People are being hearing a lot of news about the vulnerability. Owing to a global issue, vulnerability importance has been greatly recognized recently. Well, we know it's mostly about medical science, but at least it might help people to look at the problems by knowing their weakness, rather than always highlighting strengths. Because the point here is sometimes you don't realize your own strengths until you came face to face with your greatest weakness. If you just want to look at the dictionaries to see what the vulnerability term means itself, using the Merriam-Webster dictionary, vulnerability means the quality or a state of having little resistance to some outside agent. If you've ever seen a dog on leash suddenly refuse to walk any further, you know how much resistance one little pet can put up. So when someone called vulnerable, it means he or she is more possible to be physically or emotionally hurt. Someone who is unable to protect him or herself against significant harm or exploitations. If you just want to look at the definitions of vulnerability from the international panels, according to IPCC, vulnerability is the combination of exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. It implies that a system is vulnerable if it's exposed and sensitive to the effects of climate change and at the same time has only limited capacity to adapt. So here is the adaptive capacity is more narrowly focused on the specific skills and mechanisms that are deployed by human systems to contribute to resilience. So we try to withdraw resilience here as a broader term, a broader system property that is the capacity to absorb, utilize, or even benefits from disturbances, shocks, or stressors, which includes the idea that resilient systems are sufficiently robust, can even benefit from different disturbances. But resilience itself can be defined as both an individual and a systems. It can be viewed as an individual in psychology. Resilience means the ability of adult to manage abnormal situations, particularly their involvement in war, distress, or even routine abnormal events such as major traffic accidents. So I think this picture can well depict the meaning of resilience in terms of the individuals. But also individuals can be seen as a part of the cities. So therefore, the resilience notion can be also defined in the cities. The resilience term itself was first used by physicians to explain elasticity and explain the material's ability to withstand external shock. The term later used in other disciplines, such as psychology, social science, and community development and engineering design as well. Basically, definitions of resilience for system or community is the ability of that system to return to its usual or normal shape after being bent, stretched, or pressed. So the point of the resilience here in the definitions is trying to say how you can absorb the change, how you can absorb the effects, but not only return it back, but also take some benefits out of that. If you hit the wrong note, it's the next note that determines it was good or bad. So urban resilience is the capacity and ability of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems within a city to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kind of stress and shocks they experience. It's a kind of path forward and measures the capacity of those systems within a city that are expected to deal with such an event. There are different ways of measuring the resilience of cities. One of those ways is using the indicator-based methods. If you look at the literatures and try to find those important dimensions of the resilience in a system, especially in an urban system, you will come up with five main dimensions of natural, including environments and the intensity of disasters, physical, such as electricity, water supply, socials, including peoples, population, educations, economic, including like income, employment, insurance, and so on, and also institutional, like the development plans, networking, and others. So, based on that, in this research, we use Climate Disaster Resilience Index, which identifies an area's strengths and weakness in facing and managing any climate-related disasters. As I mentioned, it has five different categories. Each category consists of five different, several different variables, and each variables consist of other parameters. Basically, the information was gathered through the questionnaire survey. Respondents were required to respond to the parameters based on Likert scales, and we could calculate the weight that they put for these different parameters. Higher values of resilience are equivalent to the higher preparedness to deal with the climate and disasters. And it increased a higher value, higher number of resilience means the city is more robust to accept those changes. But resilience is not the only parameters that we need to look at the issues when we're talking about hale and hardy city, because not only the system resilient is important, how they are able to deal with the disasters, but also we need to consider the role of peoples and community. So here we define the another points of the coping mechanisms: ability versus competency. Coping mechanisms is defined as the behaviors mobilized to manage the internal and external stressful situations. That's where we consider the combinations of capability and capacity in order to come up with competence. And the delivery would be the way that people react to those stressors. Based on the preliminary research that we did on the coastal residents of Taiwan, we came up with five different coping mechanisms, or we call them coping styles by people. They may choose either of these ways or sometimes the combination of them in order to react towards the stressors. It might be behavioral, structural, technological, financial, or spiritual. Each of them might include different ways, and we try to put as much as possible options that people might go for when they face any disaster or disturbances. The study area in our study is Taiwan coastal area, as you can see in this picture. So we try to collect data from those people who are living around Taiwan's coastal areas through questionnaire survey. And here is the results of CDRI, or Climate Disaster Resilience Index. In this picture, as you can see, the red color means it shows a very low resilience, and the yellow color is the high resilience. As you can see, just a few zones in Taiwan's coastal area showed very high resilience towards disasters, and there are majority of the areas that shows low or very low resilience. Maybe as you can see, the highlighted part is southwest coast and northern coast of Taiwan, which they showed the very low resilience with the darkest color of the red. Let's look at the data in more details for the CDRI dimension scores in hotspots. We took some zones and cities that we found that the resilience is quite low in those areas, including Tainan, Kaohsiung, Chiayi, Taoyuan, New Taipei, and Yonli. And we tried to see what are the score of resilience in each cities in general, in average, and also in each different dimensions. And we found something very interesting. First of all, as you can see, there's not much difference in terms of the natural resilience score in different cities, and that's not something surprisingly, because we know that Taiwan is not a big country; it's a small islands, and when a natural disaster happens, usually the intensity affects the whole country. But if you look at the other aspects, such as institutional and economy, we can see a large difference between different cities. The highest resilience score coming from the New Taipei city with 3.88 out of 5, and the lowest achieved for Yonling zone with 2.72. And we can see how different dimensions shows different scores. As we can see, there are quite lowest score for the institutional and economy status economy dimensions for Yonling, but this values are quite high for the other countries. Also, we looked at the climatic coping style and see how people react or respond to the disaster when they face. This figure trying to show the coping strategies adopted by coastal households to deal with extreme weather event. Number 5 means they always go for that options, and number 1 means they never choose that. As you can see, people's usually in Kaohsiung and Tainan, they prefer mostly go for structural or technological coping mechanisms when they face a disaster. But usually people in Yunlin are a bit shy. They prefer most to choose for the spiritual, which means like the praying and do worship and sometimes sharing the food with the neighbors. The most important coping strategies recommended by coastal households to deal with extreme weather events are also depicted in these pictures. And as you can see that the technological alternative is the most preferred one in Kaohsiung. Structural is in Tainan. Financial is in Chiayi and also in Yunlin. But we can see the behavioral and spiritual is also very close in Yunlin. It seems that there's quite close proportions for the selections of the spiritual and behaviors as well as kind of financials for the Yunlin people. Let's back to the resilience map. As we can see, those areas in southwest coast and also the northern coast showed at least resilience. And also those people, especially in Yunlin, they showed also less effective coping mechanisms in terms of the preventing from happening again. So that makes them also less resilient. For the northern part, we can say potential flooding, industrial productions, and demographic structure could be the reason for the very low resilience in that area. And for the southwest cone, we can consider like the biophysical vulnerability, which is the chance of high flood depths caused by heavy rains. Also, the social vulnerability, including having the elderly living alone, low household assets, and low health care could be the reasons of low resilience. If you want to conclude, I would like to conclude it with a very nice quote by Heraclitus. The only thing that is constant is change. Taiwan ranked 7th in climate change impact nations based on the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Germany 2017. Impacts related to climate change are evident across regions and in many sectors important to the society. The risk of climate hazards depends on both regions' resilience and community coping mechanisms that we call them copability. Most high-risk regions in Taiwan are located along the western coast of Taiwan. Those regions might be easily affected by storm surge flooding, sea level rise, and coastal erosion. Priority of flood mitigation plans in these vulnerable regions is recommended to reduce the hazard impact effectively. We can see that here in our research, Yunlin is the most vulnerable spot, having different degrees of risk in terms of economic, biophysical, social, and institutional, as well as less effective coping mechanisms adopted by local residents. North and East Coast also showed some potential vulnerability and climate-induced risk. Residents in areas with less resilient score also adopted less effective coping mechanisms, mainly due to economic and social reasons. So, full understanding of local coping mechanisms and adaptive capacity of the region is essential for preparing, responding to, and recovering from climatic hazards. Communities which are resilient to climate change are characterized by an ability to engage in collective action, high levels of social capital, such as strong community relationships, strong community competence, such as local governance structures and process, and resilient infrastructure. So it's important to note that resilience is not a trait that people either have or do not have it. It involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. Herein, we are also proposing the idea of 4R package, which can be used as a kind of the strategic tools for disaster management. It including the 4 sectors of resources, reason, roadmap, and response. The intersections of all these 4 sections will come up with the resilient systems. The point is that in most of those water, energy, food nexus that we have a lot of discussions around, the role of people and local community has been neglected. So here we're going to put that importance into the 4R packages, because here we consider the resource of social capital. In reason, we also highlight the role of peoples, as we need not only to explain the necessity of the disaster prevention plans, but also provide them some ramifications, explain them what will happen if we do not do that. Also, in order to achieve that, we need a roadmap, an action plan with very details, just like ingredients to reach that disaster management plan. Another important point is the response. We need to consider the interconnections between energy, food, water, and more importantly, people. I would like to wrap it up my talk with a very nice quote by Charles Darwin. It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. Thank you very much for your attention.